Welcome back to We Want Picks. I'm Artem in the May, and I'm going to be breaking down the final Contender Series card of the 2024 season. And it is, of course, going to be week number 10 out of the 10 weeks. And to be honest with you guys, I think this actually might be the most difficult card to predict of the entire season so far. I did say that they left the best for last, but in hindsight, I think they left week 9 as the best card. But I do think that overall, this is still a very, very solid card. And I am a little bit late to recording this one because I was actually waiting on the odds to be released for the card because the widest fighter is minus 185 on this card, and most of the fights are pick'ems. So that's kind of what I was waiting on because I thought that would make for some very interesting talking points in this one. And unfortunately as well, I do have the sniffles a little bit. My whole flat has some sort of sniffles, so unfortunately I've got to deal with that. But I did of course have the article up on the WeWantPicks.com premium membership website, which is $10 per month, but you can get a 3-day free trial if you do sign up using my code ARTEM, and I did have that article up last week. I do know that the PFL is coming up this week as well. I'll write my article on that one today, and then I'll have to upload the video probably in a day or two as well. So definitely keep your eye out for that on the We Want Picks channel as well. And with all of that being said, now let's get into the predictions for the final card of the 2024 Contender Series season. So the first fight on the Tapology order is Mohamed fighting against Jonathan Micallef, and this is going to be at welterweight, and it's going to be a pretty good one between two pretty hyped up prospects. If you didn't know, Mohamed is signed by, is managed by Ali, so the UFC probably quite likes him and knows him like that, and Jonathan Micallef is a guy that has been finding a lot of success on the Australian regional scene. He does have a very big win over Joseph Luciano, but unfortunately did lose to Alden Bates, but come back with a big win over a guy from New Zealand that I was pretty high on, Matt Vaile. Unfortunately, he beat Matt Vaile, of course. Now, looking at the odds for this fight, Mohamed is a slight underdog and Jonathan Micallef is minus 135. Looking at Mohamed, he does only have 5 professional fights, but he does have a couple of professional kickboxing fights on his Tapology record, and when you do watch those fights, you can see it. When you watch his MMA fights, I mean, you can see that kickboxing background coming through because he is a very technical striker in MMA. He does throw a lot of leg kicks, he throws a lot of kicks in general, and he does have a pretty solid jab. On the feet, he's not really like a super high volume guy, but the technique does come through, and he does have one finish by knockout. Most of his finishes do come in the grappling. He does have pretty good wrestling, he mostly does wrestle against the cage. Now, the problem that I kind of have with this one is I feel like in a lot of matchups, he actually is the better striker and he chooses to wrestle. So I do understand that he does have pretty good grappling, but I do still worry a little bit about the fight IQ in moments, especially because if you only go out there and watch his most recent fight against Abdul Sami Walifaizi, you will see that he was attempting takedowns pretty early into that matchup, and Abdul Sami Walifaizi was able to just like judo throw him and reverse these takedown attempts and end up on top over and over again. Like more than once, Adu was attempting a takedown, Faizi would just toss him with a judo toss, and then he would attempt a takedown again when he would have been the better striker in that matchup. I'm pretty confident in it. And then of course, he does have a lot of other submissions as well because he does go out there and wrestle a bit. But the kickboxing is where I think he is actually the best. And if you watch his fight against Matt Special at one point was a pretty hyped up prospect 4-0. Adu kind of come out of nowhere and knocked him out. It was actually in the clinch through a head kick, like kind of exiting the clinch and knocked out Match Special like that. I do like Adu's kickboxing a lot. Very technical, very, very hard kicks. And I do think he is the more technical striker in this matchup against Micallef because Micallef, his style is like a very pressure forward style. He's a bit more of like a brawler on the feet, and what he wants to do is he wants to close the distance pretty quickly to then go out there and try and get some takedowns where he can work ground and pound on top and also submission attempts. The way that he fights is definitely very forward pressure. He has very good takedown defense and very good wrestling, and he's very, very aggressive. Now, Jonathan Micallef, a couple of things that I do have to point out. There was a little bit of a red flag as he didn't look amazing against Alden Bates, because Alden Bates was able to just defend the takedowns pretty easily and was actually kind of tossing him around a little bit in there, eventually finding the finish against him. But when Micallef looks good and when he's finding the most success is when he's able to dictate the pace, when he's able to control the cage, get the takedowns and end up on top. I do like Mohamed Adu in this one here, but I could potentially see him getting overwhelmed on the feet by Micallef, who isn't the most technical striker. He does kind of come forward, and I think he does leave himself to be quite hittable as well. Adu has a lot of hype behind him. I think a lot of people are not buying into the hype. I don't really see why people are super high on Adu, but I can also see why people are a little bit more reserved. But I do just think in this matchup, Adu is the more technical striker. I do think that he does have good enough takedown defense to defend the takedowns of Micallef, and I think that he can win this fight by decision. It looks like most people on Tapology are picking Adu, even though actually he is the underdog at the moment at plus 105. Moving up, we have Leslie Hernandez fighting against Julieta Martinez. Now, the thing about Julieta Martinez is that you will not find tape on her at all. She fought for this promotion called Samurai Fight House, and typically her fights would be on their YouTube channel. But her manager did remove all of those fights intentionally, so Leslie Hernandez couldn't find anything on her. Now, luckily for me, me and her manager are, I would say, pretty close at this point. Definitely the best relationship I have with a manager. And he was able to help me out just a little bit with some highlights. So I've only really seen some highlights of Julieta Martinez. One thing that I can tell you about her is that she does have a Taekwondo background. And you see it in her fights, really. She does have very good kicks. Kicks are definitely the best part of her game. The way that she fights is, I don't think she necessarily has the most technical boxing, but what she wants to do is she wants to close the distance, and she'll finish nearly every single combination with a kick of some sort. Most of the time, it's a head kick, and some of the time when she lands that head kick, she gets the knockout, as she has 4 wins by KO. I do have to say, though, I don't think she's necessarily fought the best levels of competition, but she does have 1 win over an opponent that was 7-0, which is definitely her best win by far. She has worked in a lot of grappling into her matchups as well. This armbar win come pretty recently, and the way that she kind of got that was she was on top landing ground and pound, and her opponent kind of just gave her the arm, and she took it, got the armbar there. She's been working on her grappling a lot, and the grappling is coming along to kind of match her striking skill set. She fights against Leslie Hernandez. What I can say about Leslie Hernandez is I think that she actually is going to bring a little bit of a tough matchup to Julieta Martinez, but also a couple of things that I think that Hernandez does that will work in the favor of Julieta Martinez. I think that in this matchup, if Leslie Hernandez goes out there and tries to get the wrestling going, that's definitely her best path to victory, because I'm actually not too sure how good Martinez wrestling is. She does have very good grappling that is coming along as well with her striking, but Hernandez has pretty good grappling as well and pretty good wrestling. Now, what I do worry about a little bit with Hernandez, just kind of from what I saw, is that when she does fight for the LFA, she did take... which is her whole career, has been for the LFA. But when she fought for the most recent LFA fight against this girl called Yadier, I believe. I think she's actually the one that just got knocked out by Alex Pereira's sister. Anyway, Yadier in the first round was really able to overwhelm her, and Hernandez just looked like she wasn't dealing well with the pressure. She didn't really like the volume. She was just kind of closing up and backing away. I think that Julieta Martinez, just being like a 20-year-old super aggressive Taekwondo fighter, I think that she can find success there, just kind of overwhelming Hernandez. But another thing that I have to say about Hernandez, though, that I would be, I'd miss it if I didn't say it. She actually also has a Taekwondo background, and another thing as well about Hernandez is she has a boxing background as well. Now, I actually don't know how far this boxing background went, but to my knowledge, it sounds like she had a pretty extensive amateur background, and the LFA commentators, especially in the Durand fight, were talking about it, but I couldn't find too much on it. I know she did have 1 professional fight, but she didn't win it, but yeah, Hernandez has a boxing background as well, and her hands are pretty good. Her hands are probably better than Julieta Martinez, but in this matchup, though, I am going to pick Martinez because I think that she is going to be the more aggressive fighter, and if she does go out there and just be aggressive. I think that she can overwhelm Hernandez, as we have seen in a couple of Hernandez fights when she is on the feet. So I like Martinez here. I'm not too sure if she can get the knockout though, but the odds do favor her just a little bit. On Bet Online right now, Julieta Martinez is -130, Leslie Hernandez is +100. I'm going to go with Martinez. I'm going to go with her by decision, but Hernandez's best chance, in my opinion, is to get the wrestling going. Then we have Yadier DelValle fighting against Antonio Monteiro. This is at 145 pounds. And I'll be honest with you guys, I was a little bit disappointed when I looked into the tape on both of these guys, because Yadier DelValle, I had watched him fight before against Michael as well, which was this fight here, because of course I was watching tape for Michael as well when he fought against Bogdan, and I actually picked Bogdan to win that fight. And that DelValle win was probably part of the reason for it, because I thought that Grad could get some takedowns if he needed to. DelValle is a prospect that a lot of people are pretty high on. I thought that he was going to be a little bit better than he was. I wasn't entirely impressed by what I saw. And the thing about Antonio Monteiro is this guy has 22 professional fights. I couldn't find that much tape on him, but thankfully I was able to at least find the most recent fights. There's 2 most recent fights, and then a couple more older fights as well I was able to watch. But talking about Yadier DelValle, he is a prospect. He's 7-0. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and he's a little bit of a guillotine merchant, which I don't really like. In his fight against Pena Alamov, I actually wrote down how many times he pulled guillotine. He pulled 2 guillotines in round 1 against Alamov, another guillotine in round 2 against Alamov, and another one in round 3. So he had 4 guillotine attempts against Pena Alamov in that fight. Alamov is a wrestler. He's not really that dangerous, and I guess DelValle just thought that he could pull off the guillotine, so that's kind of what he does. He doesn't really have takedown defense. That's kind of it. On the feet, his striking defense is okay, but he doesn't deal very well with pressure. His takedown defense isn't great because he just often pulls guillotine. He does have that win over, of course, Michael as well. And in that matchup against Michael as well, he actually spent the whole first round on the back of Michael as well, kind of threatening a rear naked choke as well, had to fight out of it. I thought that then DelValle had to kind of work to steal the fight. I thought he might have stolen the fight in the third round with some takedowns. But that's kind of it for DelValle. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. His cardio is pretty good. Against as well, he did gas out a little bit in the third round. But against Pena Alamov, who was just constantly trying to take him down and wrestle him, and he also pulled guillotine multiple times, I thought that his cardio looked pretty good considering. So I think that DelValle, he can go 3 rounds if he needs to. But yeah. Looking at Antonio Monteiro, the first thing that I thought about him was that this guy is a small featherweight. I think Monteiro is definitely a bantamweight. I think if he makes it into the UFC, starts making UFC money and hires a nutritionist, you're going to see this guy at 135. He's not very big at all. And another thing about Monteiro that I was kind of surprised about was that this guy is like just a wrestler. He's a top control wrestler, but when he does get on top, he does have very good transitions. Like he will be in the full mount position, and then he'll move to side control, and he'll throw knees to the body, and he'll just kind of move around when on top. He's a very active grappler, and you can see that in some of his results. But the thing about him as well is that when he was against Lucas Tavares started to land some pretty big shots against him in the third round. This was a 5-round fight for Shuto, and he did gas out quite a bit in that matchup. Another thing as well about Tavares is that he had multiple guillotines locked in against him in early. So Tavares, who I guess is just not as good of a grappler as DelValle, was able to threaten that guillotine against Antonio Monteiro in that matchup. Another thing about Monteiro is I thought that his striking was very, very stiff, and he has no head movement, and his hands are pretty low as well. So on the feet, he's not really the best striker, but he doesn't need to be because he doesn't want to strike. He definitely wants to get that fight down to the ground and control on top. Now, I do know that he does have a couple of submissions recently, but I actually would say that he's not necessarily a very dangerous grappler because a lot of these fights are going the distance, and he also did slow down quite a bit against Lucas Tavares. So maybe if this fight goes out there and it's a very aggressive round one. I think that DelValle's cardio is actually the one that should be able to go the distance. The fight that the pick that I've got written down here is I thought that both of them were going to look more impressive. Both of these guys are not great strikers, but DelValle should be able to capitalize most in the grappling, and he also has better cardio. So my pick is DelValle to win by decision, and I believe that he is also favored as well. Minus 165, one of the biggest favorites on the card, which is kind of crazy to say, but that is my pick, Yadier DelValle to win by decision. Now we move up to Nick Piccininni fighting against Luis Gurule. This is a short notice fight. To my knowledge, Luis Gurule has actually accepted this fight on about a week's notice. If you guys didn't know, Nick Piccininni, of course, did fight on, I believe it was week 4 against Jack Duffy. He won a decision that a lot of people disagreed with. I personally thought that he won the fight, but, you know, a lot of people disagree with me on that one. And he was actually meant to rematch Jack Duffy on this card. And I believe either Jack Duffy pulled out about a week ago, or maybe Jack Duffy just never accepted the rematch for some reason, and they had to find a short notice opponent. And man, they found a good short notice opponent. I would actually say that this is probably a step up in competition from a rematch with Jack Duffy in a fight which Nick Piccininni won by taking the fight on 10 days notice. And then you're going to give him 6 weeks notice to fight against the same guy. I thought Piccininni was going to win the rematch, and I think a lot of people agreed. But now he takes on Luis Gurule, and Gurule is not going to be an easy fight for him, and the odds do suggest that it's dead even on Bet Online. Betway has it minus 110 either way. My bookie has it minus 111 either way. This is a 50-50 fight by the odds makers' standards, and I would almost say that it probably is about that as well in general. This is a tough matchup for Piccininni, I think, but I do think that he can prevail. Now, the reason for that is because Nick Piccininni, of course, he went out there and he did fight against Jack Duffy, and one thing that I really was a little bit kind of surprised about in that fight was that Piccininni's striking was just really exposed. It was nowhere near as good as I thought it was, because if you actually watch his fight against Jomar Park, he spends a lot of this time on this fight not wrestling. Now, Piccininni, if you guys don't know, is a wrestler. He's got a very good wrestling background, college wrestling background, I believe D1, All-American, you name it, he's done it, and you see it. But against Jomar Park, his boxing actually looked pretty good. Now, it didn't look great in his previous fights, but that's just because he was wrestling. Against Park, his boxing looked pretty good, and I thought, you know what, like Piccininni can probably close the distance against Duffy, who's only throwing kicks, and have some good moments. And Duffy just was beating him up on the feet, let's be honest here. But I did think that Piccininni was able to win the fight. I thought that he was able to come back in round 2 and round 3. I think it's the decider that a lot of people disagree on. Piccininni rocked Duffy. Like, Duffy was hurt. He was stumbling around. He was rocked. I thought that moment stole the fight for Piccininni in that one there. But that's kind of Piccininni's style. He does fight now against Luis Gurule, who is 9-0, and 9-0 against pretty good competition as well. This guy has been spending most of his time recently against Fury FC, and he did recently become the champion by defeating Jacob Silva, who I believe has been on the Contender Series twice. At least once. Twice. Yeah, he has been on the Contender Series twice. But yes, he finished him by choke in the 4th round, and previous to that, he has been winning a lot of fights by decision. The way that Luis Gurule fights is lots of forward pressure, not that many kicks, but when he does throw kicks, they are to the leg or to the body. Lots of punches in close range. He's constantly moving forward, breaking down his opponent. Deadly ground and pound once he gets takedown with very strong top control. He's got good cardio, but the hands do lower in the 3rd round. Doesn't attempt takedowns as much as Nick, but accuracy is pretty low. Breaks his opponents with pressure. So I had that written down twice there, and that does just kind of describe the way that Luis Gurule does fight. He is constantly moving forward, really trying to work and sap on the cardio of his opponents. And that's just what he does. He's constantly moving forward. He's got pretty good boxing combinations, really rips to the body and to the head. But the thing about Gurule is he's not like a very high volume guy. Like, I don't really see this guy actually throwing that much volume on the feet. He's just kind of constantly moving forward, wearing his opponents down. He does have a wrestling background as well. I think it's also a very high level wrestling background as well. I did Google it, but it was at 116 pounds in college. And I think he became a state champion, but don't quote me on that. I didn't have it written down, so maybe not. But Louis Gurule, he does attempt takedowns, but not that often, and it's usually later on into the fight. I think if Piccininni wants to win this fight, he needs to not let Gurule control it, because if Gurule can control the striking, Piccininni is not as good as striking as Gurule is at all, and we learned that again, unfortunately, against Duffy. So I think Piccininni needs to get the wrestling going, and I don't see why he can't. Piccininni's 5'6", but he's a huge guy for the weight class, like he's a massive flyweight. And I think in this fight now with a full camp, 6-week training camp, instead of 10 days, I think that his cardio is going to be pretty good. And I think that he can control the wrestling. That's why I've gone with Piccininni here. I think he's going to need to get the wrestling going to really disrupt the striking that Gurule is going to try and put on him. And I have got Nick by decision, low confidence. It's a pick and fight, low confidence fight, kind of pick your poison, striker versus wrestler. Now, this is really the main fight that I was waiting for the odds to come out for. Because, here's the thing. So I did my tape study last week. I believe I was feeling really good about the Contender Series. So I did it on Thursday. The Contender Series for me is on Wednesdays here in New Zealand. And I didn't like the conclusion that I come to. That never happens. It doesn't really make sense. But when I was watching the tape, I come to the conclusion that I thought Nick Klein was going to win. And I didn't like that conclusion. I know it sounds a bit odd, but I was like, okay, I need to think about this. So I thought about it again for a couple of days, looked back into the tape for a second time, and I'm going to pick Nick Klein. But I have quite a few doubts here for multiple reasons. I do know Tapology, only 7% of people are picking Klein, but a lot of the time in Tapology, I think it could be fair to assume, especially early on, that a lot of people were kind of just picking based on records and numbers. But 7% of people picking on Tapology filled me with a little bit of doubt. But another thing as well, as I look at the odds, he's only plus 155. So that means that the odds makers must have at least seen something that I agreed on, because I was worried that Klein was going to open plus 400. But now let's talk about the fight. Nick Klein. The first fight that I watched of Nick Klein was probably his worst performance by far, because it really made me think that maybe this guy wasn't amazing. I watched his fight against Dorhan Dokai, the first fight, and in that fight, he was wrestling against Dokai, Dokai was wrestling against him, and it looked like he gassed out at the end of the first round. But in that fight, though, Dokai really was ripping his body, and was finding a lot of success to that point. In the second round, Klein really started to slow down. Dokai just kept on ripping the body, and in the third round, Klein just had absolutely nothing left, failed a takedown, and Dokai was able to finish him off in it that way. But the way that Klein fights is, I don't think that his striking is great. He just kicks a lot, like a lot of volume, a lot of body kicks, a lot of leg kicks, but he does have a pretty decent jab as well, and he can throw a cross behind that jab. But the way that I think he can win this matchup, and this is why I think it's actually a pretty good stylistic matchup for Nick Klein, is the wrestling. He's got good takedown defense, which is going to be important in this fight. But another one about him is that he has got great get-ups if he does get taken down. And another thing as well that I was so impressed by Nick Klein, though, was his fight against Colin Huckbody. Now, Colin Huckbody does have pretty good wrestling. He's probably not the best fighter in the world. But in that fight, Nick Klein won the first round and just broke Colin Huckbody with the wrestling. And by taking him down over and over and over again by controlling him, Huckbody eventually gassed, and Nick Klein didn't. So when Nick Klein is in control of the wrestling, his cardio is significantly better, and he was able to find a late submission over Huckbody very late into the fight. And about Heraldo Souza, this guy's got a highlight reel on YouTube. That was the first thing I watched. I don't usually just like to watch highlight reels, but this guy's highlight reel is insane, because it's just him closing the distance and landing huge combos and getting big knockdowns and KOs in some points as well. But I'll be honest with you, when I actually watched his tape, I wasn't all that impressed. This guy was meant to be sacrificed to Alain van der Merkt, who's an 8-0 prospect from Belgium, maybe Germany, Belgium, I'm pretty confident. Yeah, Belgium, sorry. And then after that, unfortunately, van der Merkt had to pull out. So Wes Schultz stepped in, who fought, I believe, on the first week and lost by TKO in a pretty brutal fight against isn't that someone's name slipped my mind, but I can recognize his face. Nonetheless, Wes Schultz had to pull out as well. Probably didn't get cleared from that fight because he took a lot of damage. And I know that Nick Klein is his teammate, or I'm pretty confident Nick Klein is his teammate, so that's probably how the fight ended up taking place. Heraldo Souza, on the feet, very small, just to start with. Very small for 185 pounds, has fought at 170 pounds somewhat recently, and honestly, he doesn't look like he cuts weight for 185 at all. This guy is not a big middleweight. On the feet, very, very fast hands, good eyes in the pocket, a lot of movement, and maybe too much movement. So what he does is he just closes the distance, and when he closes the distance, he just throws down, he throws combinations, and I think that's his best chance to win, is just to land a massive combination of Nick Klein in the pocket early, because he's got really bad cardio. This guy, it's really bad cardio, and I think the reason why is because he wastes a lot of energy just kind of doing things that aren't scoring. Like he spins, like he runs, literally runs around the cage, around his opponents, and then he gasses out at the end of the first round and really gasses out in the second rounds. So that doesn't make sense. Another thing as well about Souza is, even though he is a better striker than a lot of his opponents, he's constantly shooting for takedowns. But the way that he shoots for takedowns is he'll clinch against his opponents and then just kind of like, I don't really know what the terminology is, but he's trying to get a takedown, but he's not like dropping to get the takedown. It's just kind of like vertically holding his opponents up against the cage. So he's not really like getting a takedown at all. It doesn't really make that much sense to me. He wrestles a lot more than he should. His takedowns don't look great, and there's a lot of clinching. Was very tired in round 2 against Antonio and Filho, so this matchup here and the Marco Antonio fight was very gassed out. I think in this fight, if Heraldo Souza can't knock out Nick Klein in the first round, Klein is going to be able to take over, because I think that although Klein's cardio isn't that amazing, I think he can out-wrestle Souza here. And Souza is a guy that just goes out there and attempts takedowns, and I don't understand why. So if Nick Klein like either can initiate a wrestling opportunity early, or Heraldo Souza does, I think that Nick Klein can get the takedowns, and I think that if Nick Klein gets the takedowns, I think he can control Souza on top. Now, he's going to have to worry about the grappling, because Souza has a lot of wins by sub, but a lot of those wins by sub come from after knocking down his opponents with his hands, because his boxing is pretty good. As I said, his highlight reel is amazing, but when you actually watch the fights, I was like, not that impressed. Now, to be fair, I will be honest and open, I was not very impressed by Klein either, but I think in this matchup, I think that it's going to come to wrestling. I think that Nick Klein is the better wrestler. So give me Nick Klein to win this fight. And I think that he probably will finish Heraldo Souza in the third round, because I think that Heraldo Souza is going to gas out. So that's my pick. I'm picking Nick Klein. He's not as big of an underdog as maybe I expected, but I think that he can win. It's the lowest confidence pick on the card by far for me, but I just kind of think that if Souza wins, he's going to make me look dumb, because I think he's going to knock out Klein in the first round. But the way that I see the fight going is, if Nick Klein does go out there and wrestles early, I think he can get the takedowns on Souza, and Souza's not going to be able to deal well with the wrestling style, because he's got pretty bad cardio. So that's the pick. I'm picking Nick Klein to win by late finish, and I do kind of hope that that happens, otherwise I will look very silly. But yeah, that's it for the whole season. So let me know what you think in the comments below. This is a very tough card to predict. It could go pretty poorly. So if you made a lot of money on week 9, you know, just don't go too crazy on this one. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next one, which will probably be the PFL card with Francis Ngannou headlining against Ferreira. So I'll see you guys in that video.